Thank you so much. Thank you to all of you. Thank you to Africa for welcoming us so warmly in our way back home to transform Club of Rome in Club of Home, as Sandrine rightly said this morning. As a Spaniard, I feel very much at home in this place, in this area. Also because, it looks so much like, it's extremely different, but it looks so much like Andalusia, Al-Andalus, the region of the south of Spain, which, by the way, some centuries ago was brought to the highest level of civilization by Africans. Let's remember that, and let's recognize, and let me give also my thank you for that, for the civilizational role that Africa had in Spain, which, as you know, is the country in Europe the closest to Africa. So, before leaving the floor to my colleagues in the panel, I would like to give some few provocations about why this emerging new civilizations initiative exists, besides the fact that we decided it to exist 1 year ago in Rome. Some of my colleagues, and I don't disagree with them, that's one aspect of it, would say that this is the plan B, just in case the plan A, don't work. Just in case all the calls to emergency, which are rightly put on the table, which are much appropriate, just in case all those calls do not move things enough, do not move the decisions of politicians, of investors, of CEOs enough or not fast enough to prevent collapse. So in a way, yes, this is the plan B the Club of Rome has for the future of humanity. But I think it's much more than that. I would say that the Club of Rome has also decided to be, in the 21st century, the Club of Home. If you change an additional letter, it becomes the Club of Hope for humanity. So this is also about bringing a strong message that we have got unwillingly a reputation of doomsdayers, the people who bring the bad news, collapse will happen. But actually, what we do is a lot about creating hope, of the hope which can come, as we say in this beautiful expression of emergence from emergency. A point which is important is that collapse, it has been said this morning, collapse is not something new in the history of humanity. So, and in particular in this continent, you know a lot about Africa, but also about collapse, but also in my country we know a lot about that. So maybe because I'm a Spaniard, I'm not so far away from the concept of collapse. Maybe I'm more sensitive than others. Because, some centuries ago, we had an empire with the widest geographical scope of all empires in the history of humanity. In the 16th century, the King of Spain was governing places in Europe, in the Americas, a little bit in Africa, not much, but also in Asia. And that was the empire where the sun never set. And still, from that climax, from what many people consider that climax of Spain, it collapsed completely. And the history of Spain has not been a nice one. The history of modernization of the country has not been a nice one. Mainly the 19th and 20th centuries have been a history of suffering, of civil wars, of conflicts. So we also know a lot about that. So we know that beyond collapse, which is something happening many times in nature and in humanity, and our colleague Ugo Bardi has documented that in a very scientific way, we have to push for something else to emerge, for something new to emerge, in case the established institutions do not give the good responses. Another aspect of emerging new civilization initiative is that of humility, recognizing that, as Luvuyo said this morning, language is limited. Our capacity to understand reality, to access reality through our rational mind and our language is limited. There is much more in reality beyond that, and that can be accessed, or the best way we have developed to access that is art. As Mr. Fukutake put very clearly this morning, we have also to play with this. Art not as an entertainment, but art as a fundamental way of accessing reality. And in this sense, we also are listening to other voices, to the voices of art in this emerging new civilization initiative, and knowing that we don't have the responses. As the most famous Spanish poet says, Antonio Machado, "Walker, there is no way, one makes the way by walking." So we have not the responses, we cannot have a beautiful plan to get where we want to get, because there is so much complexity out there. And I will finish with this. This is also about addressing complexity. Because complexity we should find a different word for complexity. We should talk about life, period. Because it's about life, and we cannot define life without referring to life. The knowledge about life is, to a large extent, beyond what we are capable to express, but what we have known, even if we are not able to know everything, what we have known is that living systems, complex systems, living systems change through learning. Somebody said, and that was very true, there is no difference between living and learning. So living systems change by learning and by mutual learning, and this is also why we are here, to learn from many different sources, to learn from Africa, and to engage into dialogues which are not easy when you engage into dialogues from very different perspectives, and sometimes opposing perspectives, to get to the point where you start learning, when you start to have mutual learning. So that's also why ENCI, the Emerging New Civilizations Initiative, exists. And I will finish my words with another citation from Antonio Machado. I will say it in Spanish and try to translate in English. He said, "Hoy es siempre todavía," which is difficult to translate. This is a sentence of 4 words on which books have been written to try to interpret it. My translation is, "Today is forever still." And my interpretation is, "The future is open. Let's make the future we want happen." And this is also why ENCI exists. The Emerging New Civilizations Initiative exists. So that said, as an introduction to what we do, unfortunately we don't have Audrey Kitagawa with us because she's been victim of sickness, but we have a fantastic colleague and friend from the Club of Rome who brings with him at least 2 perspectives, that of India, an ancient civilization, and that of the US, where he lives and works and tries to make sustainability concrete and real in a big organization, which is Penn State University. So Paul Shrivastava will give us some more insights on Emerging New Civilizations Initiative. Paul, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Give me a 3-minute notice. So this initiative, the New Civilization Initiative, I have to say, I learned that I was going to replace Audrey on Friday, and I boarded the plane on Saturday. So the thoughts that you're going to hear are not exactly prepared, but I do have a presentation. I'll try to walk you through it. But it's not entirely clear in my mind what we emerge into, what the new civilization can be. So it's all very tentative. And as Carlos pointed out, we are still working through some of the core ideas. When Mamphela asked me to do this, she said, if I could address 2 issues. One is why we need to transition to a new civilization. And second, what would that transformation be like? What do we need to do the transformation? So I've prepared some remarks to address those 2 questions broadly. I want to thank Carlos for his kind introduction. I want to thank Mamphela for having the confidence to put this big charge of defining a new civilization on me with 1 day's notice. And I want to thank the next generation, because all I know about Africa, this is frankly my first visit to South Africa, and everything that I know about Africa is through my connections with my own next generation. So my son has been working in Africa for 5 years. He lived in Senegal and Liberia for 3 years and now works in Washington, but his job is still in Africa. And over the 5 years, we've had many conversations that have just simply blown me away in terms of an understanding of what is going on the ground in Africa. And we won't have time to do all the story sharing around what I have learned, but I'll just give you one example of the kind of truths that you can get by being in Africa physically. And that have to be conveyed to your 70-year-old father at some point in life. So the first year that he was here, we were having a conversation in the middle of the year, and I asked him, how are you doing? And he said, oh, everything is fine, except I'm always hungry. And I said, why are you always hungry? You have $5,000 in your bank account. Why don't you go and buy some food? He said, no, Dad, you don't understand hunger. He's telling this to his father, who grew up in a poor village in India. So I said, what exactly does it mean? He says, when I say I'm hungry, I mean my village is also hungry. I can't just go buy food and eat it by myself. And I don't have enough food to share with everybody, so I prefer to just be with them. He was living with an African family at that time in a village in Senegal at the border of Mali. And it sort of opened my eyes to how Ubuntu can be translated. It's not all about me and I and what I'm feeling. It's also about you and others and being part of a community on such a fundamental thing as hunger. And there have been many other conversations such as these over the years, and I've developed a deep appreciation of the differences between my understanding of the world and the reality over here. So I say this rest of the presentation with great humility. If you don't find it relevant, that's understandable. So let me also say, as a part of sort of these early remarks, that we've heard a lot of very interesting ideas and principles and thoughts about what needs to be done. But I want to change the tone a little bit to action. Understanding is very important, and I sort of have difficulty disagreeing with much of what has happened today. But I want to put a little more attention on how we do things, how do we act to change things that we find ourselves in. So my second part of my presentation will be more about change and action. So I'm going to flash a few slides up over here. Why do we need a new civilization? I have 2 answers. One is that things have changed fundamentally, and this is the science behind it. On the left-hand side, you see how things have changed on socioeconomic trends of population, real GDP, foreign direct investment. There are dozens of more variables that have been tracked, and these charts all begin in 1750 and go to 2010. I'm not going to give you a big mathematical or statistical lesson. There's only one lesson we are going to draw from this. On the right-hand side, you have Earth system trends, again going from 1750 to 2010, about a 260-year period. And what I want you to notice that in both the socioeconomic trends and Earth system trends, there is one inflection point. And that inflection point is around the 1950s. Something happened around the 1950s that has made all these graphs basically hockey stick graphs. Things are moving steadily, and then things jump. Partly it is the population, and partly it is consumption, production to satisfy that population. But the results on Earth systems are almost immediate and direct. So you see these kind of rises in ocean acidification, in tropical forest loss, in domestication of land, in degradation of terrestrial infrastructure. So we have now come to a point where we are at the edge. We are crossing planetary boundaries, and if we don't want to cross them, we have to create a new civilization. So that is my first answer. We are now officially, scientifically entered into what is being called the Anthropocene, a period in which humans and human activities and social activities and economic activities are what's driving nature. There is no such thing as nature anymore. We are the strongest force of nature. Whether it's the hydrological cycle or the carbon cycle or the nitrogen cycle or the phosphate cycle, they're not cyclical anymore. We determine when they happen, or sometimes we don't determine, we're just making changes that make those cycles deeply perturbed. So with this kind of force comes a lot of responsibility. We need to move into a different civilization, a different way of being, a different way of living. So we need to change everything around us. The World Economic Forum has recognized this for the last 5 years running. Some of the top risks to humans and to businesses, which is what they are interested in, are risks caused by these disturbances, extreme weather events, and other sustainability risks. The other reason why we need to change is that we are already destroying and have destroyed significant parts of our existing civilization. Sometimes we don't notice it, especially in the area that I come from, central Pennsylvania. There is not that much evidence of what is being destroyed. But if you look around the world, we have destroyed so much that a number of jurisdictions, political jurisdictions or cities, have declared climate emergencies. So you've heard about big cities like London and Vancouver and Sydney declaring climate emergencies. The numbers actually are 1,177 cities. And if you look at the number today, it's probably gone over 1,200, because every day there are dozens of cities declaring climate emergencies. 23 nations have declared emergencies. 7,000 colleges and universities have declared climate emergencies. There are 290 million people now living under emergencies. But declaration of emergencies and action are two different things. So we need to do the declaration first, but then we need to see what are we going to change, how are we going to change our ways of being, and how are we going to create this new civilization. The good news is there is an agreement, there is a global consensus around the Sustainable Development Goals as one solution. So sustainability and sustainable development goals are agreed to by 193 nations, and businesses think there are $12 trillion business opportunities, so there is a kind of support from the business side. It's not just a political consensus. There is a commercial logic behind it. And I understand they're not perfect. David and I have had this conversation before. There are a lot of contradictions and conflicts embedded in these sustainable development goals, particularly the goal of growth. Acknowledging all of that, I still think that they provide us a systemic way they give us a concept of what planetary management could look like. We need to get away from managing within country jurisdictions or city jurisdictions, because most of these challenges that we're now facing that deal with biospheres, that deal with the atmosphere as a whole, climate change or changes in river systems or mountain systems, they're not contained within cities or nation states. They are planetary scale problems, and we need a governance system, or at least a way of thinking, that allows us to address them at a systemic level. So when thinking about new civilizations, I feel like those 6 blind men of Hindustan who went to see an elephant, and they were all blind. So depending on which part of the elephant they touched, they thought it was something different. I'm sure you'll have heard this story. So the good news over here is that at least we are touching the elephant. We might think it's a snake. We might think it's a rope. We might think it is a fan. We might think it is a tree. But we are touching it. And we are making our own individual efforts to create this new civilization. I see a lot of examples. You are sitting in an example right now. The Spear States, which is doing things very differently from what wineries in Pennsylvania or in the United States do, being very mindful of the land that they are on, and doing it with a social consciousness. They are creating their own new civilization in a microcosm. And there are literally thousands of examples. In the previous organization that I worked for, Future Earth, we documented what we call the seeds of the new Anthropocene. There's a database available of examples where people are trying to do things differently and create their own new civilization. Okay, so moving to action and change, I just want to say one thing, that my job now as the sustainability officer for a major university is to make the university sustainable. So first, to give you a very brief glimpse of what kind of university I teach at. So we have 23 campuses in Pennsylvania. They're located in these blue dotted areas all over the state. We have a budget, we have 100,000 students. We have a budget of $6.4 billion, for those of you who want to know how big that is. If we were a country, our GDP would be bigger than 40 other countries. So our budget alone is bigger than 40 countries' GDP. We have 17,000 employees. About 8,000 of them are researchers, faculty members, who have expertise in everything from agriculture to energy to all the sustainability sciences. I came in 2 years ago with a clear mandate from the top to move the university towards sustainability in 5 areas: curriculum, research, operations, the physical plant of the university, student life, and community engagement. And the way we are doing it is we are, from the sanction from the top, we have adopted the Sustainable Development Goals as the framework. And we have got every single budget unit to own sustainability for themselves. The sustainability office doesn't do sustainability for the College of Engineering or the College of Business. They have to do it for themselves. We are the consultants, we are the supporters. We can give them resources, both financial and intellectual. And we are hitting all the systems of the university, because it's not just a question of mind change. And I don't think that for a university of this size, with knowledge across, we are the biggest climate research university. We have more IPCC authors than virtually any other university in the world. We know climate change. Our president is a climate scientist. So we don't have to think about mindset. We need to change the systems of the university. We need to change the decision-making processes of the university. So whether it is strategic planning system, we have something called the enterprise risk management system. We have something called the university investment system, which manages almost $10 billion in assets. We have to change the rules and procedures within this. And this is like a knife fight in a telephone booth. You have to tackle every single manager one-on-one. And it does not happen quickly. This is a long haul. It's a 10-year process. We are at the 3rd year of it. But the good news is that we don't get very much pushback. Nobody is telling us this is the wrong thing to do. And I'm saying nobody. Yeah, there are limitations of resources, and you might get only X amount of budget, et cetera. But nobody is disputing that this is where the university needs to go. So that is the good news. I'll stop over here. There are other ways I can answer questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Paul. So we have more people in the panel bringing certainly different perspectives. Let's practice a little bit of mutual learning. So Tiara Dungy, please. What's your take?
My take, my story.
Whatever you want to share with us.
My name is Tiara Dungy. I'm a PhD student from Indiana University, Lilly Family School of Philanthropy. There is an entire school dedicated to the study of generosity and giving. Please come see us. We have lots of research to share. But I'm here because I was asked to be here. Dr. Rampele has a commitment to the youth and to new ideas and to pushing agendas that is unparalleled. But her ask is something that reminds me of where I come from. I'm here because my mom disciplined me, her sisters disciplined me, my grandma loved me, and my farming sister over here fed me. That's why I'm here. And discussing new and emerging civilizations, we have to think about what civilization means. So we think it's the most advanced way of doing things. There's civilized, there's uncivilized, there's savage, and then there's modern, all these things. But it's more than that. It is the way we do things. So the way we do things should be the best way of doing things. The way this ties back to philanthropy for me is within my research agenda. It's based on the premise that we need to claim ownership over our own power through generosity, through the relationships we make with individuals, communities, and each other by connecting talent, time, treasure, and testimony through giving. Philanthropy translates to the love of mankind. But oftentimes when we think about philanthropy, especially in conversations like this, we're always talking about, well, where are the big bucks? Where are the big foundations with the money that they can just throw out? They can fix this. We have a huge budget as a university. You guys are probably a nonprofit, right? Yeah. We have all this money. Where is that money when it comes to climate change, right? It's just easy to put money into it. But it's more than just putting money at things because you have it. It's about employing those talents, those things that we hold dear that you can't monetize, putting it towards changing our trajectory that's very important. That's why the Youth Summit was so amazing. We have over 50 young people, academics, entrepreneurs, bosses, government officials that have solutions, have the talent, have the skill, have the energy, and have the frustration to make change happen. And so I encourage everyone in this room, I'm actually going to demand, this is something else that my grandma and my mom did to me, they voluntold me to do things. So I'm voluntelling all of you, meet someone who doesn't look like you, who is out of your age bracket, out of your, whatever is about you that you feel you wear on the outside. Find someone who looks very different and make a partnership with them. Don't just share your name. Don't just share your job title. Make a partnership. We are here to give through relationships. We are here to give through talent, but also money. I'm a fundraiser. I'm on the faculty at the fundraising school at my school. So also open your wallets. You might have a little bit of money somewhere in here, I've heard. And so also don't forget, money is an important part of this. Invest in businesses. Invest in the entrepreneurs that are making a difference. We're going to ask for it. We have no shame, and no means nothing. It makes us prettier, so we keep going. So please, meet each other, give each other a relationship, give each other the support we need to continue fighting this fight.
Thank you. Very good. Very good. Actually, we had a little bit of discussion yesterday in the workshop we organized on this activity, Emerging New Civilizations, about how do we engage into dialogues with people who don't see what we see,
It's the only way we can
How
make
do,
change.
how do we engage dialogue with Donald Trump?
With Donald Trump.
That would be a real question, you know?
I'm an American, not a magician. I don't know.
No, but seriously, because so many people don't see what we see. So it's not about, I mean, it's fantastic to be here and to share with you, but the people here share already a lot in the perspectives of what we have to do. There are many more people outside who don't share those views. How do we engage in dialogues with them? So, but I want to give time to our two other participants. Wanjiku-Mwagiru. Apologies for the pronunciations, but...
You pronounce it very well, no problem.
Please.
It's lovely to be here, and I'm grateful to the Club of Rome for this forum. I'm also very grateful to the IFR, Institute for Futures Research, the University of Stellenbosch, for having partnered with the Club of Rome to bring all of us together. It's wonderful to see a variegated room. It's wonderful. They have some meetings you go to, and you're probably the only black person. I've been to many of those. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can.
Ah, fantastic. So it's lovely to be here and to share the energy that is here. And yes, indeed, welcome home. And you can stay if you feel like. Africa is our heart, H-U-T. It's also our heart, H-E-A-R-T, because we all evolved from here. So you couldn't be more at home than where you are right now. I know I have a few moments, so before I'm shut down by Carlos, I better share what I have in mind with you. I will start with a quote, and believe it or not, from Victor Hugo. He had a timeless observation when he said, "You can resist an invading army. You cannot resist an idea whose time has come."
Mm-hmm.
African time has been here for a long time. Mm-hmm. So we cannot anymore evade the recognition that Africa has been here and we are part of it, because it's an idea whose time has been a long time coming. However, we are very patient as Africans. We are patient and we have been waiting, but we do know that our time is here because our time has always been here. The rest are definitions. Having said that, let me share a few highlights or some moments in my life, if you don't mind. When you wake up to who you are, when you wake up to recognizing that you're born into Ubuntu and you know there's no problem with that. But then one day you go to school and you are told, no, Africa is divided. Africa is carved up into so many parcels and portions as per the night meeting in 1884 in Berlin. And therefore, Africa is carved up. Africa is not carved up. There are no boundaries in Africa, and I would like to share that with you. And let me put that into context. I would like to share that with you because I am privileged for having had the opportunity, whichever way it came to me, to work in every country in this continent except the Northwest, the Maghreb part of the world. But in all other countries in sub-Saharan Africa, I've set my little feet. And I was home wherever I went. And there's one thing I discovered. There are no boundaries in Africa. If we can just, all of us as Africans and the world, recognize there are no boundaries. I would drive in a truck in Togo, and the person driving me would say, to our left of a small truck in the middle of the forest is Ghana. To our right is Togo. And then you realize, actually, what we do as we've always done, we cross boundaries because there are no boundaries, because we belong. And anybody else who does not come from Africa also belongs. So that has buoyed me up. And that has really taught me the experience of knowing that we have always been on the correct trajectory, because you cannot carve up the world and then wake up one day to say, oh no, we are all one. We have recognized from time immemorial, you cannot especially carve Africa into pieces. Africa has been here for a long time. But in 1963, when Kenya was becoming independent, I was a very young high school student. I'd just finished my Form 4. We were taught a little song, and it went like this. Africa is shaped like a question mark. Okay, in reverse, of course, the bow should be on the right side, on the right side, looking at it from here. But from the left, Africa is shaped like a question mark. And then the next line was, Africa has the answer now. And we felt very proud. In 1963, we were in cloud 9. I will go on to 1968 because I'm an environmentalist, and I recognize that in 1968, Rachel Carson's book, Silent Spring, was published. It was Rachel Carson's book in 1968 that said, Silent Spring, the world is going to be silent. The birds are dying in the Great Lakes of America because of industrial pollution from agricultural chemicals. So Rachel Carson's book set in motion the environmental movement. And I'm really, really, really glad to be saying it was a woman who did that. We are mothers, and we are part of Mother Earth. So a woman taught the world, you can change your perspective. You can begin to recognize that without the environment, we have no survival. Fast forward to 1972. I'm a very young lecturer at the University of Nairobi. I'm in charge of the course on Africa. And guess what? The Club of Rome, 1972, limits to growth. And in comes sustainability, beyond environment sustainability. Now sustainability was another orange altogether. We had to change, especially after 1972, our whole curriculum. I had to change. I'm an environmentalist, and I had to align my course content with the Club of Rome's limits to growth. So the whole concept of sustainability, the linkages of the environment and humanity are inviolate. Going a little bit forward, in 2000, a new century came in, and there's been a lot of hype. And we are still in that hype. And it's only been 19 years since 2000, but we are already on another platform. Why am I talking about 2000? In context of this forum, will the Club of Rome be able to spring another rabbit out of the hat and give us a theme that can rally the world and unite it so that we have a similar perspective, a shared perspective of our responsibility, not only to ourselves, but to the planet as well? Having said that, I know I don't have much time to go into a lot of other details, but I would like to recognize the fact that the Emerging New Civilization Initiative is a platform upon which we can climb, step up, but we really have to ask ourselves, firstly, what is emerging that has not always been there? What is it going to do to us? When colonization emerged, what did it do to us? What is the next trajectory of the emergence? Will it keep us close together? Will it divide us? Is it all about reaping resources? Is it still about sustainability? Is it still about one Earth, one planet? So as we contemplate on what climate emergency means, we have to contemplate in terms of a long-term survival trajectory, because we have a role to play in cleaning the mess as human beings that we have precipitated on the earth. So I hope that in forums like this, we can all go back to the hearts and the houses and the castles and the schools and the universities we come from, and recognize that in whichever little dot you are on the earth, you have to play your part. We are also living at a time when the individual has a lot of latitude to make their own decisions. We are really blessed. And I know there's a lot of dictatorship all over the world, not just in Africa. A lot of us grew up being told Africa is chaotic, Africa can't govern itself. Hey, but here we are. Here we are. So I think there's a lot of room for optimism and trust and belief in ourselves. We look forward to this journey. And going back to the Club of Rome, I really, really hope I'm an incurable optimist because I've seen a lot of optimism in my life. I grew up during the Mau Mau when we thought the world was over. There were no schools, there were no families, we were all herded into villages. As a child, we really thought the world had come to an end. Guess what? We emerged, and that emergence has brought me and my daughter Jerry and her two sisters here. So there has to be optimism that we carry on our backs, beneath our skins, and exude it through our pores. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It is indeed a journey, a shared journey. So, Sinegugu Zukulu. Again, apologies for the pronunciation.
No, that's correct. That's correct. Okay, thank you very much. My name is Sinegugu Zukulu, coming from the Eastern Cape, which is the next province, coming from Poneland in Amadiba. Okay, I've been having lots of questions about what is this. This is my traditional attire from my tribe in Amampondo. I come from Pondoland. And Kwamadiba, which is where the Xolobeni was mentioned here during the opening address in Dr. Mampele Rampele's speech, which was read. And I do have 3 colleagues, by the way, there. I've got Bongega, Pegeni, and Sbu. Please show yourselves up.
Stand up.
Okay, all right, okay, thank you. They come from Xolobeni. Okay, before I get carried away about Xolobeni, let me get on to. I would like, with my few minutes here, I would like to to invite you to listen to the voices from the periphery. There are voices out there globally that are not being heard. The voices of the indigenous people on their lands. They are there in the Amazon, they are in the Latin America, they are in the Southeast Asia, they are all over our continent in Africa. And they are saying something about what sort of future we need that would be acceptable. But I do not think we were all listening. We were created to have 2 ears and 1 mouth for a good reason, so that we listen more and talk less. So, and I'd like to say that's the voice that I would like to bring to the fore in this conversation now. For instance, we have heard about the Standing Rock in America, where the people were fighting to protect their homes, their livelihoods, their waters. We have recently, I'm trying to say to you, things are not okay. There is something wrong with the current development trajectory that we are pursuing as a global community. We have just heard now in the news that the US has pulled out of the Paris Agreement. And if you, for instance, globally, all of these recent years, we have heard that environmental human rights activists are being murdered. Who are coming from the indigenous communities who are fighting to protect their homes, their livelihood, their lands. For instance, if I were to look into figures, in 2014 alone, 116 of those leaders were murdered. In 2015, 185, 3 leaders every week. In 2018, 164 of these human rights activists were being murdered. murdered for standing up to protect their homes, their livelihood, the health of this planet. Is the world listening to them? So therefore, we need to listen, because those people, they have got a message for us all, a message for governments, a message for corporates, a message for transnational cooperation to say what sort of future they want on their lands. Who were being implicated in the murders and assassinations of these people? Mining companies, logging companies, agribusiness, those huge corporations. So therefore, what sort of future, what sort of development trajectory we need in these spaces? Indigenous people all over the world are holding a key in terms of adaptation to climate change. They have the solutions which we seek, but when people meet in those COPs, how many of those voices are being heard? How many of those voices are brought to the fore? How many of those voices are being listened to? We need a development that promotes justice and democracy. We must embody the indigenous knowledge system of those indigenous communities, because they know what is best and what is good for their lands. And the development that will be sustainable, I mean ecologically sustainable, is the one that will be drafted with and by those people themselves, because they know better in terms of their needs. They know what they want to improve in their lives. We need a kind of development trajectory. We need a kind of future that embodies the principles of FPIC, the free, prior, informed consent. People must be given. If we were in a global village that listens to the aspirations of the indigenous people, we would not be having all of these matters, because corporations, governments are not willing to listen to those voices. As a result, the people get eliminated, assassinated, in order to remove those peripheral and vulnerable voices. So governments, corporations, transnational corporations need to abandon the Father Christmas syndrome, where they know it all. They come laden with what they think is good for the indigenous people, and people are then coerced and forced to accept that which has been crafted without them somewhere by people, because they know shareholders, they know that they will make more money if they are able to get through that. Public participation is done as a box-ticking exercise. That has got to come to a stop. Father Christmas syndrome must fall, and fall now. So the kind of development trajectory we're looking for is the one that is ecologically sustainable. I've said that. Extractive industry is not development. You cannot, when you come to extract that which is on the soil for the benefit of your shareholders, when you come to pollute somebody's waters, when you come to destroy the biodiversity, the natural resources, the ecological infrastructure that people depend on, and call that development, that is not development. Maybe I don't know what development is. If we're looking at the SDGs which were mentioned, for instance, once again, in closing, I want to go back to the Xolobeni case. If you want to know more about Xolobeni, you can search that. You can go to YouTube, then Google search Xolobeni. Xolobeni is Xolobeni. And you search, there are lots of films on the struggle of the people of Xolobeni, which is a 20-year struggle. the people saying no to mining and the government forcing it onto the 20 years. It hasn't started. People are determined, people have died, but people are saying no. And when you look at the development that people have said we want, there are only two acceptable ways we would like to develop ourselves. They say agroecology or agriculture and ecotourism. And when you look in terms of what they have chosen, if you look at sustainable goal number 1, no poverty. So when they produce their own food, they don't have to be dependent on somebody. They don't have to go and buy food. They produce their own. SDG number 2, zero hunger. So they will have. So they will address that. Goal number 10, reduce inequality. So those people, in terms of their way of life, their culture, they will be able to achieve that. Climate action, when they have their waters, their ecosystem, their ecological infrastructure protected. So they are able to achieve that. They are able to adapt to climate change. 14 is life on land. So when you look at what, this is, I'm mentioning this as an example, but most, if not all, indigenous communities all over the world, the voices, the things that they say, the development they want to see on their land is about achieving these SDGs. But is the world listening to them? No. The world is not listening. I thank you.
Thank you so much. We got from the three of you, we got very strong message. I will come back to them later, but let's practice the recommendation which has been just made. Let's listen to others. So there's one hand.
My name is John Gilmore. I'm an educator by choice, and I work in the creating opportunities for children in this country who live in very impoverished conditions in the townships. And we have proven that they can go on to university and do very well. But what is key to them doing well is in the refocusing of education, we have to focus on values-driven education. It's been disappointing for me today to not hear the word education. The Club of Rome has no hope if you don't prioritize education. We have a continent of 1 billion people. 50% of the people in this continent are under the age of 20. 2050, there will be 2 billion people, and again, 50% of that 2 billion will be under the age of 20. There is only one way to create a new civilization, and that is through a complete reframing of the way we teach children and the way they learn. The child has to be at the center. The child has to be empowered through emotional development, not just through filling up heads through information. We need a revolution, not just in Africa, because the education of the West has failed Africa and is failing the West. And I think the Club of Rome needs to really be metacognitive and very clear about its position with all of the good thoughts of today, without addressing the fact that so many children on this continent do not have access to school, and those who do have access to school have access to very, very poor education. There are some really exciting solutions possible, but they need deep investment, 20-year timelines that will not come by accident. Thank you.
Thank you.
This one is directed to you, sir, the last speaker. So, like you were saying, in our communities, I also come from Africa, Zimbabwe. I have my roots, my rural place. And we note that we as our communities, most of them, we have forgone, indigenous lifestyle for urbanization, because when development started in our communities, we felt it was the way to go because we had an eye for development and urbanization, living in a fancy house in a city. And most of our parents or our grandparents started sending their children to school so that they can fetch jobs within the cities and take care of the family at the expense of what? Of nature. So you would notice that our societies, our governments, they come again and they colonize those people. For instance, in my country, the people in the rural places, they are given fertilizers, they are given seedlings so that they can farm. But this is not a bad thing. But then, because somebody is offering something, then you tend to worship them. That's how it normally works, because you're looking forward for something as well. But you will notice that this has actually forgone the indigenous knowledge, which has been the most sticking and lasting knowledge within our communities, because we have some rituals or some activities that we would say, on a Wednesday, you don't go to a farm. You are not allowed to cut trees within an area which is not yours. So this is a question to you. What can we do to gain this momentum back again within the communities? I'm sure we are now few within the rural places. We have displaced as young people. We are no longer investing in our rural communities, whereas we are saying that's where the nature lies, that's where we have the most resources, that's where the big companies are coming to mine at the expense of our communities. And now we talk of indigenous knowledge as if I'm the one who's supposed to come again and teach my elderly the indigenous knowledge, yet it's something that was existing there. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Cormac Cullinan. I'm an environmental lawyer by profession, but I'm also one of the founders of the Global Alliance for the Rights of Nature. I think this is an incredibly important conversation, because if we don't have an idea of a viable future, we lost. But one of the things that I notice is missing is I think we need a discussion about law and governance, because legal systems are the DNA of society. In other words, they determine how societies replicate. And the DNA we've got at the moment is not capable of replicating of producing an ecologically sustainable society. To give you an example, in the apartheid years in South Africa, people used to say, apartheid is created by laws. That means to get rid of apartheid, you have to change the laws. Laws can only be changed by parliament, therefore change must come through parliament. But that route was blocked because only white people could vote. So what happened is that the pressure built up to such an extent that it went round parliament, and a unique process was created which negotiated a completely new constitution. But that constitution was drawing on visions that had been created as long back as the 50s, the Freedom Charter, which expressed the aspirations of the people for the kind of world that they wanted. Now, what we're seeing at the moment in the world is there's going to be a break like that. There's going to be a dramatic change in many countries. And if you don't have in place a vision about what you want in terms of governance, you won't put in place the right DNA to replicate a future society. And there's interesting stuff happening in the world with the Universal Declaration of the Rights of Mother Earth, International Rights of Nature Tribunal, many other initiatives. But I draw attention to the fact that I don't think you can achieve this, that this conversation is not complete unless you talk about law and governance. And I'd urge you to add that to your agenda.
All right. Okay. By sitting here, you must know, I'm just reminding you because you know about this, we have just fallen victims of being here. But in terms of the initiatives and the ideas going forward, it's not only supposed to come from here. It's supposed to come from everyone here, this gathering here. Okay, so so that's one thing you must. So when we don't mention something, we have got limited time, but there are people here. We need to mention those things and put them into the pot. Going now to the question of the IKS, it's actually very interesting, gentlemen from Zim. I am part of my advocacy work. I'm busy documenting the indigenous knowledge system. I'm going back and I'm interviewing the elders. We do wilderness trails with the young people. We go and live in the forest with an elder who has got the indigenous knowledge. We are doing programs of promoting the indigenous knowledge system because, unfortunately, our schooling system has not made an effort to promote our indigenous knowledge system. Alistair McIntosh, one of the Irish writers, talks about planting one foot in the past, and then in order to determine your way going forward. Digging, the question you asked earlier on, you asked before, after she has spoken, what is important for all of us is to dig where we stand. If you are an academic, use that platform. If you are a financier, use that particular platform you have to bring about the change that is relevant to this particular discussion. So for wherever you are, so dig where you stand and bring about this meaningful future that we are crafting, that we are talking about here. So it is very, very critical. So the elders who are still there, who are still surviving, need to be given an opportunity to narrate, to tell that, and get that documented, get that written into books, so that as the kids go to school, as they get to university, that knowledge is there, is available, is at their disposal. Make films out of that. So the onus is on us. It's our responsibility as people who realize, who are part of this conversation, to say, hang on, this is our knowledge. This is the African knowledge that is so critical in terms of even addressing the climate change adaptation. So we need that knowledge. So let's bring it to the fore and revive and rescue what we can still rescue. Thank you.
It just so happens that one of our Youth Summit participants is involved in a seed bank that brings native seeds together from around the continent, selling, distributing, all those kind of things. But imagine if we put these stories, with the knowledge, with the people, with the experience, with the systems and with the resources to make it something we can then put into the education. That's why we need to speak to each other. Make sure we understand the human and social capital in the room, because we just solved a giant problem right here.
Yes.
So can I react to?
Yes.
I want to react to the comment on education, because I think it's really the fundamental problem that the education systems that we have, particularly in the state that I am in, and probably all across the United States. So what are education systems, if you think about it? They are mining companies. They mine raw material from villages. In my case, we have 23 mines. That map that I showed you, where our campuses are, we take 18-year-olds from high schools. We train them for the urban market or the global market, and no one goes back to the village. So after doing this for 100 years, what has happened to villages in Pennsylvania? Basically, knowledge has been extracted from them, and those communities have lost all resilience. You see all kinds of social problems, health problems, opioid crisis, diabetes crisis, all across the state, partly because there are no resources left. So let's not blindly just follow educational institutions with their current DNA. Somebody mentioned the DNA issue. What does education need to deliver? It does not need to deliver only raw labor for the industrial workforce, which is the model that the current system was built on. So I think when we talk about a new civilization, we're talking about institutional revamping. Every single institution has to be studied under a microscope, and fundamental changes, some of which were talked about by my brother here, have to be brought in as part of the DNA. Thank you.
Thank you.
So earlier, young people have been really asking about money, trying to start new businesses. But I think this is a good opportunity to also think about communities that these businesses are trying to go into and, provide new solutions. So what I'm asking is, in terms of business, what values are you looking into after what you've had as a way to engage those communities? But also I'm thinking about the practical step out of this session in terms of Club of Rome advancing the very same principles that the brother there pushed for, because I think we are looking all over, but communities are doing this work already. These forms of relations between humans and nature already exist. So the work that we're supposed to do shouldn't be so big. So practically, how do you as Club of Rome take up a position to say, we're going to push for communities or new set of values that are going to be advanced, even with those who are trying to come up with new solutions, business opportunities to speak to climate mitigation.
Yes, I would like to respond to the education question, to the storytelling question, to the indigenous knowledge question, and to the economic question, because there's a story about Europe that we have not been good at telling, which relates very much to the agricultural societies around the globe, which is how we transformed our agricultural societies into modern societies. And parts of that were all these local communities where a guy with a box went from house to house and collected a little bit of money each month, which became the collective health insurance, and which became the local bank, and which became all these little institutions that grew out of local communities. And part of that was also the folk schools. That's a long Scandinavian story. I'm not going to spare you the details. But that was about educating the young farmhands to go back to their villages in order to build strong local communities and become community organizers. And from those schools and from this tradition grew a lot of strong cooperatives. And one thing that I learned about visiting Niger and Uganda was that there has been a lot of cooperative initiatives in Africa in order to strengthen local economies, but they've all started at the production side, and there's been no local market for it. The cooperatives that work in the UK and in the rest of Europe started at the consumer side, and they created local supermarkets, grocery stores. So there's a lot of experience in Europe dealing with the exact same issues. And my question to you, and that's more to the audience actually, if we told that story, how can we tell it so that it relates to you and doesn't just become another story about a bunch of white people far away? Because I really want to relate to your situation and share our history. So if you would like to discuss that, please come up to me. Thank you.
Yeah, I know. I mean, there are 24 of hands, but we don't have more time. I will just finish by thanking the participants in the panel and all of you for having been participating in this session. I said at the beginning, Club of Rome, Club of Home, Club of Hope. What you said brought me hope. You said many things, but you said, I noted, engage into dialogues with others.
And invest in entrepreneurs, especially the ones in this room.
Okay. No boundaries in Africa.
No boundaries, absolutely no boundaries. They don't exist.
And listen the voices from the periphery. I think these three messages are very strong. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Please don't leave. Stay up here. Okay, so many of you still had your hands up, and what I'd like to propose is, first of all, this discussion does not end here. This is only the beginning. Many of you have asked, what do we do next? So beyond the immediate what we do next, which is we're going to have a darn good party tonight, there is a long-term, I hope, both short and long-term plan of how we can work together. Under the leadership of myself and Mampela and our members, we have restructured the Club of Rome to carry within its new home 5 what we call impact hubs. And those impact hubs are exactly what we've discussed today. They are hubs or homes for people to come together, both members of the club, partners, all of you, people who truly believe that they have some of the answers and yet want to continue to work to create and co-create solutions together. In these different areas, the climate emergency or planetary emergency, as we have converged the tipping points between biodiversity and climate into an emergency scenario over the next 10 years, we have a series of actions that we will have to bring forward. And those actions will have to be at the local level, the community level, at the national level, at the regional level, and at the international level. It will have to include a consciousness about the importance of all of our commons, the importance that actually a great deal of those natural boundaries are already deteriorating, that the melting glaciers, that's irreversible. So that is the 10-year plan for some of these impact hubs. But then we have a long-term story. If we're going to act in the next 10 years, we have to build the foundation for real systemic change. Because we talked about financing change, but we also talked about changing finance. We talked about potentially having to bundle indicators over the next 10 years so that GDP growth is no longer the central core of how we measure growth, but brought in alongside the happiness index, the well-being index, different interpretations of what real value is. That is reclaiming economics and reframing economics, both in a 10-year timeline, as well as moving towards the development of what will have to be new civilizations. To do that, we know that we have to do it together. Men, women, Africans, Europeans, Asians, Latin Americans, all of the people, with their own tailor-made solutions, because my solution in Belgium is not yours necessarily, although some of those solutions may be the same, but just need to be scaled differently. We might need macro grids in some areas and micro grids in others. We might need to take up micro projects and microfinancing for some community projects, but have some major shifts done by the IMF, the EIB, the major multilateral development banks. We talked a lot about the bottom up. We talked less about the big changes that will need to be top down. As horrible as that sounds, we have to hold the major institutions, the major governments accountable. Yes, we need to individually help. Yes, we need to act at the community level. But we also need to remember that power is what is destroying this planet. And if we want power to speak to the people, we've got to elect the right politicians, we've got to change the major institutions, and we can't just do it at the local level. This has to be the greatest massive change that humanity has ever seen in order to fend off the existential risk that we have before us. So the Club of Rome, the Club of Home, will come back here in South Africa. That is for sure. Because what we learned today is that we're all on the same journey. And what we learned today is exactly what Mampela wanted us to learn. When we spoke about this conference, she had so much hope that this would be the first stone in the building block for a new regional hub for the Club of Home in Africa. I think it's clear that the young voices we heard today said that's what we want. It's clear from the Club of Rome members today that that is what we want. And all of those that have been here have shown that that is what we need. So I'd like to end with a few thoughts linked to, and now I can't remember, I think it was our last panel, that spoke about the importance of coming together under a tree. As we came home to Africa, I would like you to take that analogy of a tree. We've now become rerouted. The trunk will be our anchor to hold up the leaves, the diversity, the beauty of the people around us. We are the holders of this new truth. And it is our responsibility, each and individual, but also as a collective whole, to continue to share these stories, to continue to share our knowledge, to continue to share the solutions, and ensure that we enable them to come to fruition. So that when we come home next time, there will be more of us and a real appreciation for this planet that we call home. So now I'd like to close in honor of Mampela Ramphele, this first summit in Africa. Thank you for allowing us to come home. And now let's go and party.